So this morning we get to talk about mercy. Think about some verses that you know that mention mercy, that are about mercy. In the story we read from Matthew, the Canaanite woman is asking for mercy. Have mercy on me. That's her call, that's her plea. But think about it. What are some other ones that talk about mercy? Bless.
Mercy, not sacrifice.
I require mercy, not sacrifice. That's from Hosea. Jesus quotes it as well, telling the religious leaders, think about this. Go learn what it means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. It's not religious observance of certain things that I want. It's for you to know how to show mercy. What else?
His mercies are made new every morning.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Lamentations 3:22 and 23. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. Some of us sang this as a song, you know, that camp song, the youth song. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. That's why I called my thoughts endless mercy. I mean, I think you could say that from a lot of passages, but Lamentations, the prophet Jeremiah is making that clear. The mercies of the Lord never come to an end. There's no expiration date. It's not like, whoops, the mercy's over, you missed out, no more mercy, we ran out of mercy. God says, no mercy for you, right? It's a Seinfeld, thing, right? No soup for you, no mercy for you. God is not the mercy Nazi, right? What are some others? Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy, right? Beatitude from Matthew chapter 5. I like this one from James 2, verse 13. Mercy triumphs over judgment.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah. Now, it's not saying there isn't judgment, but it tells, see, we often think, well, it's either judgment or mercy. No. Judgment is telling us the truth about things, about ourselves, about what we've done. Everyone's going to give an account of himself or herself before the Lord. But what is the final word of God? It's mercy. The judgment is saying, well, you were wrong about that. But guess what? I have mercy on someone like you who's wrong about things like that, right? The final word, according to James, is mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. It does with God, and it should with us. Right? So everything we're going to talk about this morning, we're talking just about this idea of mercy, the mercy of God, but there's always this undercurrent of we are to be the imitators of God as shown to us in the person of Christ, right? So everything we're saying about the mercy of God, it's not like, well, that's interesting about the mercy of God. It is all speaking to us about how we conduct ourselves in this world. We have to be people of mercy. Why? Because our God is a God of mercy. What about this one from Micah 6:8? Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Micah says, what does God require of you, O man? Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Again, people have got these crazy ideas. They think do justice is somehow in tension with loving mercy. Like they think do justice means punish people, and mercy is, well, not punish people. If that's the case, then Micah, he doesn't understand how he can, what's he saying? Do justice and love mercy. Maybe the doing of justice is the loving of mercy, right? I am absolutely convinced God does not have a dilemma. Is he going to be just or is he going to be merciful? When he's merciful, he is being just. Because the just thing is the right thing to do. And for God to be loving and merciful and compassionate is the right thing. And when he is, he's just. And so Micah, knowing that, can say, do justice and love mercy. Because the justice you do in the world will be the loving of mercy. Right? So we got a lot of verses that talk about mercy. But what is mercy? How would we actually try and define what it is? I don't have a single kind of definition. But there's a lot of things I think we can say about mercy. Well, it is the compassion of God. It is that God takes pity on those who are in a difficult circumstance of any sort. It's that movement of compassion, feeling something for the person who's in this dilemma. That's mercy. That's the mercy of God, and that's when we have mercy, is we feel compassion and then we act in kindness. That's mercy. Sometimes in the past, I've talked about it this way, that the attitude of God towards us is mercy, and when God acts out of that mercy, you can call that grace, right? You can call that grace. If the disposition, the attitude is mercy, God looks on us and says, they're ignorant. They're, like Jesus says, they're like sheep without a shepherd. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what they're doing. And he's not furious with us over that. He's merciful. He's compassionate because of our circumstances, because we're ignorant, because we don't know what we're doing, and we don't know how to do it. Father, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing is a general statement Jesus pronounces that is true of all humanity, and it's true of me and you. I don't know what I'm doing. Sometimes I think I do, but it's much safer to rely on the idea that, on the understanding that I probably don't know what I'm doing. And God can see that I'm acting the fool and I think I'm being wise, but I don't know what I'm doing. But he has mercy. So it's that kindness, it's that compassion, it's the movement of grace. But we could also say mercy is simply an aspect of the love of God, right? Why is God merciful? Because God is love. And so love is patient, love is kind. I think we can add things even to what Paul puts there in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is merciful. Love is compassionate. And Paul even says, love keeps no record of wrongs. Is that mercy, to keep no record of wrongs, not to keep bringing it up and to let it go and say, I'm not going to hold that over your head. I know you messed up, but you know what? I'm just not going to keep shoving that in your face, making you feel bad about it. I'm going to let it go. That's love. And that's the mercy of God. So in this passage, I want us to look a little bit at this text, as well as just talking as we have about mercy in general. What's happening in this text in Romans 11? Well, as our reading started with the first couple of verses, the question that is being posed is, has God rejected his people, meaning the Jews? I think the purpose of Paul in writing Romans is that he is trying to forge a kind of unity between Jews and Gentiles in the church. That is a huge task, because they're historically different. Historically, they have animosity for one another. They are culturally different. The way they dress is different. What they eat is different, right? You get down to almost anything, and it's different between Greeks and Jews, between Romans and Jews, between the Gauls over in France and Jews. I mean, they're just different about how they conduct themselves, about their customs, about their habits, about their beliefs, and what their history of belief has been. And Paul's trying to forge unity, I think, through this letter. And he's been talking for a couple chapters about the Jews and their place in what God has been doing through history. But by and large, the Jews have rejected the gospel. They've rejected Jesus. Now, not every last Jew. Paul's a Jew, after all, and he's not the only one who's a believer. But by and large, they have. The vast majority have not accepted Jesus as the Messiah. And so now Paul asks the question, so then has God rejected his people, basically, because they've rejected him? And he starts to say, may it never be. It's just impossible that God would reject those who reject him. You hear that? It is impossible that God would reject those who reject him, because God is not a tit-for-tat sort of God. You know, he doesn't do unto us as we do unto him, which would be a violation of the golden rule, which Jesus teaches us to observe, right? We can reject God all we want. God's not going to reject us as a result of that. And so Paul starts to outline why it is that these Gentiles don't need to think about, well, God is rejecting the Jews, and kind of further their animosity. And you can see that he's talking to Gentiles down in verse 13. But I am speaking to you who are Gentiles. But he's speaking to the Gentile Christians about Jewish people, not only those who are Christians, but those who aren't. Right? He's saying, what is your idea about Jews, you Gentiles who are believers in Jesus? And you might be looking down on them and thinking, they won't even believe in the Messiah, those awful people. And Paul's saying, I don't want you to think that way. That's not how you are to think. He says, verse 13, but I am speaking to you who are Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle of Gentiles. So I'm the one who's speaking to you. And look down in verse 25 before we actually get to our reading about mercy. Here's what he wants to impress upon them. He says, verse 25, for I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel. Okay? He's saying, really, the thing is, I don't want you to start feeling all prideful about your belief just because, in fact, yes, we see that there's a partial hardening has happened to Israel. A lot of them are just not open to the idea of Jesus being the Messiah. They've hardened themselves. They're rejecting that. And he says, but I don't want you to become all full of yourself. Think, well, we're so wise. We get it. We're better than those Jews. He's saying, no, don't want you to think that way. So go on down, if you would, to verse 28. From the standpoint of the gospel, they are enemies. Yep. He says, I don't want you to be prideful. I don't want you to think you're better than them and be condescending towards these Jews who don't believe. And granted, right now, where do they stand with regards to the gospel? They are enemies of the gospel. But now he starts to unfold the work of God, the work of mercy, right? But I want us first to see how he talks to these Gentiles about how they might be tempted, and I use that word deliberately because it will not be of God if they think this way, it will be of the devil, how they might be tempted to view Jews in a condescending manner, in a prideful manner, in thinking they're better than those Jews, and to kind of almost, revel in, well, they're enemies of the gospel. Paul says, well, sure they are right now. But look what he then goes on to say in our reading, starting in verse 29. The gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. He says, something you Gentiles need to remember is that God has made certain promises and called Israel to be his chosen people. And that chosenness, I believe, has everything to do with them being the ones through whom Christ would come, them being the ones who would become light to the Gentiles. Now, they didn't always fulfill that mission very well. But Paul's saying when God gives a calling like that, he doesn't decide later just to revoke it. And when he gives gifts, he doesn't take them back. And so Paul says to these Gentiles, these Jews that you're tempted to look down on because they're unbelievers, they've been called by God, and God has given gifts, and those things remain the case. Verse 30, for just as you, now he's talking to Greeks, to Gentiles, to non-Jewish people, for just as you were once disobedient to God. Well, they're Gentiles, for crying out loud. They've been pagans, right? Before they heard the gospel and put their faith in Jesus, they worshiped many gods. They had their whole, multiplicity of gods and temples and all that they did. And he said, now think about it. He says to them, where were you? You were disobedient. For generations, all your ancestors have been steeped in this way of paganism. And you've just newly come to this gospel, this good news about Jesus as the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world. You have just now arrived to believe this. But you were disobedient. So he says, 30, for just as you were disobedient to God, but now have been shown mercy because of their disobedience. Now, why does he say because of their disobedience? Well, if we went back to Acts, and if I took the time, we could read the story. I think it's in Acts 18, where basically Paul, in his ministry, every city he went to, first he went to the synagogue, and he presented the gospel to the Jews who were there in the synagogue. And they were consistently pushing back and rejecting it. And finally, Paul says, that's enough. Okay, from now on, I go to the Gentiles. I mean, if you really aren't interested in receiving this message, if you're going to oppose it at every turn, then I'm just going to talk to the Gentiles who are much more open to what I'm preaching. And so in a very real sense, a sense in which these people know, they've heard the story, the gospel came to the Gentiles because of the disobedience of the Jews. That's what he's reminding them. You were disobedient, but you were shown mercy really because of their disobedience is what helped push the good news out into the broader world and away from simply being a Jewish phenomenon. Think about that, he's saying. Their disobedience has been your cause for receiving mercy. So how arrogant and how dismissive are you going to be about them? Actually, even in their disobedience, they have ministered to you, right? They have become a light to the nations, not because they voluntarily did it, but through their disobedience. They actually, ironically, became the means of the gospel going out to the whole world. So you've been shown mercy because of their disobedience. Then 31, so these also now, these are the Jews who are right now enemies of the gospel, who have experienced a partial hardening of their hearts against all of this. There might be a remnant, there may be some, but most don't accept. He says, so these also now have been disobedient, that because of the mercy shown to you, they also may be shown mercy. Paul's got this crazy idea. He's got this crazy idea that if he preaches the gospel to the Gentiles and the Gentiles receive it and start saying Jesus is Lord, that somehow that's going to motivate the Jews to reevaluate their rejection. Like they're going to become almost jealous of the fact, well, if he's our Messiah, why are all these people getting in on it? Maybe we ought to believe in Jesus. I mean, that's really what he thinks can happen. He can see that happening. That because of the Jewish disobedience, Gentiles were preached the gospel. And now because of the Gentiles receiving that gospel, the Jews will be moved from their disobedience back to receiving mercy, being willing. And then you got to love verse 32, because this is the endless mercy of God. For God has shut up all in disobedience. How do you think he would end that? He shut up an all in disobedience that he might be just in condemning all. Right? Is that what it says? If he has successfully shut up, and there's another place that this verb is used. It's in, where was it? Luke chapter 5, verse 6. It's used of casting a net into the sea, and they caught this huge quantity of fish, and it's the same verb. The fish were shut up in the net, right? The translation read earlier used imprisoned. So somehow they're all caught and enclosed. And Paul's saying, look, God has enclosed everyone in disobedience. Gentiles, you've been disobedient. Jews, they've been disobedient. So he's caught them all in disobedience so that he might do what? Be justified in condemning them? No. So that he might, the words are, so that he may show mercy to all. Mercy is going to triumph over judgment, according to James. He's got them all caught in his net of disobedience that he might now, for everyone equally, proclaim mercy. Will there be judgment? James says, yeah, but mercy is going to be the final word. All right? the showing of mercy is the end. And what Paul asserts and claims, which is not the good news I heard preached for a long time, is that God intends to have mercy on all, Jews and Greeks alike. What is mercy? It's not simply forgiveness. For those who are guilty, mercy for the guilty is forgiveness. Mercy for the wounded is healing. Mercy for the ignorant is enlightenment. Mercy for the stubborn is humbling. Right? Mercy for those running from God is to be caught by him. Right? Mercy for those disbelieving in God is to be moved towards belief. See, mercy, the mercy of God is his loving intention, his grace coming to us in the midst of our needs, and it takes all shapes. It's God coming to each one of us where our need is. So this subject of mercy isn't like irrelevant. Well, I'm already a Christian, I'm already a believer, I've received mercy. You don't need any more yet. I mean, mercy for the despondent is encouragement, right? We all need mercy. Mercy for those struggling, mercy for the worried is assurance, right? We all need mercy. And this is the good news that God is having mercy on all. And if I listen carefully to Paul, I don't want to be like those who would look down on others because of their current state of unbelief or hardness or something and think, well, I've received mercy, but I don't think they will. Surprise, surprise. The mystery that he'd mentioned, there's a mystery at work. God's going to have mercy on all, just like he shuts up all in disobedience. He has mercy on all. So the final thought then, of course, is not only for what we receive, but then what we give. Will we be people of an endless mercy for everyone else, wherever they are, whatever they're doing, whatever they're thinking, whatever they believe or don't believe? Will our disposition be like that of our Father? Mercy for them. What does that mean? Well, once again, it means from ourselves, in as much as we are capable, giving what they require, what will bless them, what will encourage, what will strengthen, what will give hope. I don't know anybody in this world needs more condemnation. I don't know anyone does. I don't. I had plenty of that. But we all need mercy. And that's what Jesus taught. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Paul takes up the themes of Jesus and just works them out. Mercy. That is the way of God.
Could you try again?
No, we're done. Yeah. Amen, Siri.